you ever feel like your life is Groundhog Day? The same thing every day. Same thing every day. Do you wonder if it's possible to get excited about life again? Welcome to GoalPost. The path to the end zone is all in your head. Dynamic conversations covering topics about mindsets that high-performing people use to get exactly what they want out of life. Be prepared to be challenged, but be prepared to receive the tools to help you reach your goals and beyond. Unconventional, but effective. Heard on allrealradio.com. Welcome to GoalPost. Now your host, Janelle Sam.
Have you ever been through a divorce or the ending of a long-term relationship? I did. 6 years ago, I went through a very, very contentious divorce. It was probably the most traumatic event I have ever went through in my life. And it was something that I didn't feel like I was equipped to handle or deal with. I didn't know how to process that because my parents stayed together until my father died. They were together for 39 years until he died. So I grew up with a family that was intact until well into my adult years. And going through that divorce, I have two children, and they had to go through this experience. And if you're listening, if you've been through this as a child and you're an adult now, or you have children, just like as I do, that's just that you've gone through this experience. Let's talk about this and how this has an effect on us and the decisions that we make. This is Janelle Sam, and I thank you for joining me tonight. I thank you for being here to listen to this show. And over the next couple of hours, you're going to hear a conversation, an engaging, a dynamic conversation with someone who experienced divorce as a child and use this opportunity. And I say opportunity because sometimes we are not aware that our greatest pain or trauma is actually disguised as the greatest opportunity, and how this man turned this to create a successful life that was launched because of the pain of the divorce he experienced as a child. And then even as he's grown up and had kids of his own, that he's experienced trauma with his children, with his younger daughter, and how he used that pain again to turn it into an opportunity to help others. You will find, in listening to this conversation tonight, that there's a different perspective on how we can either be stuck or brought down or feel like there's no way to move forward because of a painfully defining moment in our lives. Or maybe we can find that opportunity that it's presenting to us and to hold on to it and to turn our lives into something that's much more meaningful and dynamic because of it. Tonight, I am joined by a colleague of mine, dear friend, Andy Goldstrom. Andy is an entrepreneur. He is a business coach, parent coach, and family man. As a child of divorce, he learned how to be independent, both emotionally and financially. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Andy pursued his own business ventures early in his career. In fact, Andy started and built a division of real estate brokerage company that generated more than 30% plus margins and grew from one employee to over 500 employees. And then after that, he decided, he moved on and took over a national recycling company and grew the top line of that company from $70 million to $100 million of profit. And from 10 million to 17 million in 3 years. Both businesses were designated as an Inc. 500 company, the fastest growing privately held companies nationwide, and subsequently sold to Fortune 500 companies. Andy then started his own business coaching firm called Midcourse Advisors to help business owners enjoy their own professional, financial, and personal successes. And currently, Andy and I work together. We are both executive advisors for the owners of small law firms, where he's continuing, this trajectory of helping others achieve a level of success that they've never believed they could on their own before. Andy, welcome and thank you for joining me on the show tonight.
Hey, great to be here, Janelle. Great to join you.
Well, tonight's show is one that I believe our listeners will get a lot of value from in hearing about the perspective of how, trauma has been turned into opportunity. But before we get into that, can you tell me, Andy, like, where did you grow up? Where are you in the US? I'm talking to you from Houston. Where are you now and where are you from?
I have lived in Atlanta since 1998, moved down there for the first entrepreneurial opportunity as it evolved, and we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Okay.
But I've been a Southern boy for 24 years. Nobody confuses me with a Southern boy because I am a native New Yorker.
Okay.
Yeah, born in Manhattan, grew up in Southern Connecticut, and moved to Atlanta, again 24 years ago.
Yeah, because I don't hear any of that, like Southern, the ma'am, that slower pace. So I guess you left New York, but New York never left you.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, there are elements of it that it's a blessing and a curse. I'm very driven, very straightforward, not as relaxed or slow paced as some down here. I don't say I'm fixing to get lunch or y'all.
Why not?
But I have, but the weather and the quality of life and the people, and to be honest with you, with the great, the migration since the 1996 Olympics, it's harder to find a native than it is somebody who's relocated down here anyhow. So, there's a great diverse mixture of folks here with a great history in the city as well.
Okay. So growing up, do you have any siblings?
I have a younger sister. She's 3 years younger than I am.
Are you guys close?
Very, very close. Couple of reasons. One is she looked up to me because I was an academic achiever and good at sports and things like that. And so she got involved in some things that I was involved in. She ended up being a very good athlete as a result of, us practicing and spending time together, but as a result of her own skill and grit. And we've always been close because we went through a divorce with my parents together at a fragile age. And even more recently, she lost her husband last year to pancreatic cancer. So even though she doesn't live in the same town I live in, she lives in Raleigh. She and I are very, very, very close.
I am so sorry. I'm so sorry for that loss. Well, tell me, let's get right into it. Tell me, how old were you? What was that experience like as a child? Now, I went through a divorce. It was finalized 5 years ago, but it was a 2-year process. It was very contentious. And it was for me, like, very difficult to go through as an adult because my parents stayed together for 39 years until my father died. And so I did not grow up in a house that was, that went through a divorce that, was, divided, but my children did. And I felt helpless as to understanding how they were experiencing this through their eyes. But you did, right? You and your sister. Can you tell me what that was like?
Sure. I was 12 and my sister was 9 at the time that the divorce became official.
Mm-hmm.
And my memories of their fighting or disagreeing are not as prominent. I knew that they weren't getting along. They're very different people. My mother's more of a worrywart and more serious. My dad's more free spirited, and so they grew apart. And I remember telling my sister, this doesn't seem right. Even at age 12, I don't think they're going to stay together. And that wasn't me being so smart. It was just, a feeling I had, and my vision of people should get along. And these two people, whether they're my parents or not, are not getting along. They continue to butt heads on things. But there wasn't screaming and yelling and physical altercations. They just weren't getting along. Later, I found out that my dad, had an assistant at work that he was engaged with inappropriately, and she remains my stepmom to this day. And they got married later on, so that was a catalyst, I guess. But the most important thing, I think, was the after effects of it all. Once they separated, before they got divorced, just the strain on both my parents and how it got broadcast onto us in terms of.
What do you mean by broadcast onto you? And I think that's, really for anyone who's listening to what you're seeing, it's as a child, right? You have your perspective on what you believe your parents were going through based on what you could see. But even more importantly, what was going through your mind? What were you thinking about when you saw how your mom was reacting to what was going on, and how you saw your dad reacting to what he saw, and what you felt as though as a child, look, I need your attention on me because I have needs too. And they're wrapped up in their own individual stories and pain and, whatever it is that they were each individually going through. So for you, like, how was that when you say broadcasted? Could you kind of talk about that a little more?
Well, I think both wanted to feel vindicated and that they were right. And, in a divorce, nobody's right or nobody's wrong. It's usually the children who get hurt. The adults can move on. Maybe they get impacted in terms of their egos. Maybe they have a financial hit. But the kids, in my opinion, are the ones who have the biggest impact, because parental alignment and role models are so important in terms of a kid's development. And so, what the broadcasting was, we got put in the middle of who was right, who was wrong. And we got put in the middle of quite a lot of financial arguments. Who was to pay for what? My mother was a teacher. My father was a fledgling entrepreneur at the time. He ended up being far more successful downstream, but he was fledgling a little bit at the time when that happened. And that was maybe part of the stress that created an issue in their marriage. And so, it was really hard because I just wanted to do well in school, play sports, meet girls, do all the things that a kid would. I didn't have the parent or the father who I could talk about, how do I fix my car? How do I change my oil? How do I change a tire? How do I'm having girl trouble. What would you do here? And so, I realized that the focus wasn't on me, because when you're in crisis, going through a divorce, any type of crisis, there's an analogy I use is like when you're in an avalanche and you're trapped in a snowbank and you're trying to bury your way out of the snowbank in order to get air. You don't care about other people's feelings. You don't care about what's going on other than you just trying to survive. And, and as I grew into my teenage years, my dad lived close by, but we ended up remaining in the house that I was in Connecticut when my parents divorced until I, finished high school. My mother, was a worrier, and it was easy for her to worry and try and lock down on me and prevent me from doing things just because it was easier for her. And when I was 12 and 13, that was one thing. When I was 16 and 17, it wasn't a really good thing. And we had a lot of strain, and I was not a troublemaker. You know, I
was just
worked,
going to ask, did you act
yeah.
out? Like how did you process that pain? Did you continue doing good in school, good grades? Did you manage to keep that up? Did you focus on sports? What about your sister? Same thing. Like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think we just became independent in terms of our emotions, in terms of our progress, in terms of our the things that we did financially. I got jobs right away, and have always worked because I always wanted to be independent financially and not be in a situation like that again.
And when you say
eh,
just now, hold on, you say be in a situation like that again. What do you mean by that? Because
meaning I
if you're a
felt,
kid, uh-huh.
I felt um, like I had no control or power because I wasn't I didn't have the money. I was just a kid, and I was in between my parents fighting over money. So I never wanted to be in a situation where I had to ask for money, need money, um, worry about money. And so I worked as hard as I could to be able to feel comfortable in that area more than any other area in my life, sooner rather than later, which is part of my entrepreneurial journey.
So as a 12-year-old kid, right? It's not your job to have a job, right? You're a kid, right? So what would happen whenever you needed money? Was it because you're asking for money, or was this fights about, well, it's, you played sports and it's, somebody has to pay, I guess, for the equipment, or maybe it's a camp or something. Is that where the fights came up? And is that what you were hearing and internalizing, that did you feel like you were a burden because?
My mother was a teacher.
Uh-huh.
She wasn't making a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
She had the responsibility of two children and a home and
Mm-hmm.
some other, and other things. And she didn't have a lavish lifestyle by any
Right.
stretch. And she needed money in order to make ends meet. And my dad was not so cooperative and forthcoming at times. And so it was like, tell your mother,
Uh,
tell your mother I'm doing everything I can. And my mother would say, tell your dad I need more money. I'm 12 years old.
you're
I'm
12 years
getting
old,
stuck.
right?
I'm the messenger getting stuck in the middle of that. That was not appropriate.
Right.
And here's an example of what I went through. My wife still can't believe that this happened to me, but I paid for my own birthday party when I was 12. I
No.
figured out I wanted to have a birthday party. I wanted to, this was 6 or 7 months after my parents divorced. With my birthday, it was in June 1977. And we went bowling and, had pizza, and it was, obviously something that was age appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother just didn't have the money or the will at the time to want to put an effort into it. And it was important to me, and whatever, yard work I was doing or allowance I was collecting or whatever I was doing, I somehow saved up enough money to pay for my own party at age 12.
Did your parents attend that party?
My mother did. I don't recall my dad attending because of the circumstance. My mother did attend, but she didn't pay a dime.
And so that got etched into your brain, that you can't depend on, if you can't depend on the people who are supposed to protect you as a child and support you, then how much, like, you can't depend on anybody else, right? Because if it's not going to come from there, like, why would any other person help you? So as a child, now you're paying for your own birthday party at 12. And what about your sister? What about her birthday?
Yeah, I don't recall the same circumstances with her quite as much. I know from up until the day my dad died in 2015, my sister had a rough time with my dad. My dad was never abusive, but he would always get everything off his chest. He would tell it like it is, no filter. And so for me, I learned early on just to, I struggled with it at the beginning, but I learned how to deal with it. And
when you say learn how to deal with it, what do you mean? Tune him out, ignore him, pay him no mind? Like, what do you mean?
Yeah, well, frankly, I fought him a little bit on it at times, as opposed to just letting it roll off my back. And
Mhm.
so there was a bit of, um, a bit of friction, and I certainly held the adultery, and I held um, the situation I was put in as a teenager somewhat against him.
Mhm.
Not to say he was at fault by himself,
Right.
but at some point in my life, in my early 20s, I realized I could hold this against him for the rest of his life, or I could just look at some of the good parts of him, and he'll always be my dad. Am I going to try and have a relationship with him where I actually enjoy the good parts of him and be able to tolerate the other parts? And so, because my mindset shifted on that, my relationship with him actually became quite good, and I had a very good relationship with him, uh, for a very long time. He moved to San Diego in the late 80s. I would visit him frequently, or he would visit me and my family, my growing family. We went on vacations together, just my dad and I together. We went to Mexico. We went skiing together. We went to Vancouver. Um, I don't think we went to Europe together, but we went to Austin, Texas. We went to places together where we could spend time together. And he was a very smart businessman, and he was also a very creative person. He's a genius he was a genius as a photographer. He really
Okay.
had an eye for those things, and was published, and uh, and um, and so my sister butted heads with him because she didn't have the spine I had, and she was a girl, and she would cower to his directness at times, and literally for the last couple of years before he died was not communicating with him. So that was kind of
Mm.
sad.
Do you think it was because that she was a girl that she wasn't communicating with her, or just because it was the nature in which, you know, she's much younger, and just the nature of what the relationship is? Because, sometimes with parent-child relationships, even if you're you know, male, the relationship you have with a parent, whether it's your mother or father, you just might cower, you just might not feel strong enough to confront that. And so that you both had a different take on it. I mean, and I ask this because the two of you went through the same situation, but you both experienced it differently and responded to it differently.
That's a wise comment. Yeah, it's not a boy girl thing. I mean, there are, as you know, you're a very strong woman. You've made your own path. And there are a lot of men who don't have your fortitude or your smarts. And, there are a lot of, at the same time, there are a lot of men who don't have that ability either. So I think it was just the way that they responded to each other. And she
Right.
happened to be his daughter.
Right. And so if we look at what that defining moment was for you at 12, right? That here you are, this kid, peer pressure decided, all the other kids are having parties, and your 12th birthday, this is the last birthday before you're a teenager, right? That's like a kind of a big one, right? I don't know if you're, not that I want to bring up it's your faith, if you're Jewish, like, is that not the bat mitzvah? Like, I'm not sure if that is what it was. Was it your bar mitzvah?
Yeah. So to throw, you know, extra fuel on the fire, I was going as a Reformed Jew.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the track to um, be a bar mitzvah. Bat mitzvah is a woman, a girl. Bar mitzvah is a
Bat is
boy.
the girl, and
Right.
bar mitzvah is the
Right.
boy, and that's what
So
you were on
what?
track for. Okay,
Right. So basically, that's where you become a man in the Jewish faith, because
that's a big deal.
you can lead us. You can participate in a service, and there's certain things, accomplishments and
Yeah,
milestones and
yeah,
accolades and
right.
things that can stroke your ego. it all got thrown out the window.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it all came to a grinding halt because of the timing of everything. And so I became a bar mitzvah when I was 37.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. Okay. You know what we're going to do? I mean, for everyone who's listening, this is I, I, the magnitude of what that means in terms of how defining this was for Andy. We're going to take a very short break right now. Please stay with us. We're going to continue getting deeper into, the story when we come back. Okay, we're back from our short break. And just before we went in, I'm speaking with Andy Goldstrom, who is a, entrepreneur, business advisor extraordinaire, dear colleague of mine. And just before we went on break, he explained how, the story of being a child going through divorce and his experience led to him developing these entrepreneurial skills at a young age, because he had to end up saving and paying for his own birthday party when he was 12 years old, because neither of his parents were able to pay for it at the time. And Andy is of, as growing up as a young Jewish boy and approaching, this defining moment where you have, as a young man, a bar mitzvah, which is saying you are now a man in our community. We recognize you. You have made this period that's important to all young men of our faith. And because of his experience of having parents who weren't communicating, who were not only not communicating with each other, but communicating with their own children in a way that has changed and redefined how they had to respond in the world, he was not able to have this experience that every single, child who grows up in the Jewish faith, whether you're a boy or a girl, looks forward to. And so, Andy, since you and I have met, like this is news. Like I didn't know that this was part of your experience. And I find it incredibly, insightful and telling into what this journey has been like for you. The fact that something that you would have done typically when you're 13, you weren't able to do until much, much later. And so before you tell about what happened later, tell me, when you were turning 13 and all of your friends who were having their bar mitzvahs and their bat mitzvahs, how were you feeling when you were going to be able to go through your own?
I didn't feel left out. I attended, I was invited to and attended a lot of my peers' bar and bat mitzvahs.
Mm-hmm.
While they went through it. I just felt confused by the whole thing. I was like, what does this mean to me? What am I missing out on? Is this important? What is it going to mean for me as an adult, or a parent? And some of the learning and the things that I was enjoying learning about my culture, about preparing to take that step, just because it stopped.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I certainly felt a void, and you're building towards something. There's a lot of study. You go to Sunday school every week.
Right.
You go to after school one day a week. You are going
Mm-hmm.
to learn, and you have a group of peers that you're with, and
right.
and so it's almost like I just all of a sudden I wasn't doing it anymore, and so I've always been one to finish what I start, and do a good job at things, and so that was an empty feeling for sure, and one that when I got older I felt like I needed to make sure I closed that door, and felt the meaning of completing it. So it was, there was personal meaning in the sense of accomplishment, but there was historic meaning in that, part of what we do as a Jewish people is the reason we do it is so we can continue for future generations, right?
Right.
And we've been an oppressed people for thousands of years, and so that was, that's part of being a Jewish person. And I'm not overly religious, but but it's a part of me, and
It is.
And I was glad I was able to kind of, it's like a lot of things in life. It wasn't too late to catch up, and I'm glad I didn't wait longer. And it was very meaningful to me when I did it at 37 for a variety of reasons.
Right.
And so, I think one of the themes, maybe we'll hit it, Janelle, is just, there are things in life that test you and they're uncomfortable, and sometimes they really suck. And, there are, but what you learn from them and how you move on, and how you appreciate the good times, rather than dwelling and having a defeatist mindset, is really what makes life worth living. No one that I've ever met hasn't had letdowns, hasn't had disappointments, hasn't had shit happen to their family.
Right.
And as I get older and older, I realize that, and so. Right.
With the years, right? As time passes.
Yeah, no
I just
doubt.
want to take a little bit, of time to explain to anyone, anyone who's listening to this story. If you're not, you're like, what are you talking about? What do you mean, with the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah? If you're not familiar, because, anyone listening to this show, you could be from any part of the world, right? There's a global reach here. And if you are of the Christian faith, if you're Catholic, I think the equivalent would be, going to what you call CCD and getting confirmed in the faith, and what that means, solidifying your you're not just a child, you now are of knowledge to contribute as a knowing member within the faith, which is also tied to all the other cultural traditions, spiritual, faith, religious, whether it's weddings and births and deaths. And so, you go through this rite of passage that allows you to participate meaningfully, as what they consider you're a member of this community. And that's the importance of it. It's very, very important. It has nothing to do with how religious you are or how not. And so if you weren't understanding or following the story until then, this is the importance, that here was this, period of his life that was defining his membership, his, presence as a standing member within the faith that everyone looks forward to, that was not of his own doing as a child, but because of the circumstances of his life at that time, right? Not of his own doing. And so I think, the story here is, as Andy is talking and as you're listening to what he's saying, if you're listening as well, we're looking at the fact that, at the beginning of this segment of the show, I introduced him as someone who's accomplished some amazing achievements in the world of business. And even today, he is helping others do the same in meaningful ways. And so here was this defining period as a boy, young boy, and we're going through his perceptions, we're going through his perspectives as to how he took that and interpret that, what his perspective was when he made a conscious decision to say, I'm not going to hide behind this. I am not going to, because it's hard, right? This is not easy. I'm going to make sure that I put this out there. It's not some magic tool that Andy had, right? You're a kid. And sometimes we take from somebody else's story to see, okay, I went through a divorce as a child, and, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand it. His story is different. Yes, his story is different. And I think what I'd like to hear more of too as well, Andy, it's you've experienced what it is like as a child, the pain of two people not getting along and the pain it causes when they break up. But yet you got married. And I'm very interested intrigued. Was there a period in your time in your life when you were like, I am never getting married, I am never having kids to put them through that?
Just the opposite.
And what do you mean? Could you talk about it? Tell me, what do you mean just the
Yeah.
opposite?
Well, I mentioned before, adversity in life and failure in life is opportunity to learn, right? So I learned, one of the things I've learned through my relationship with my dad is always to look for the best in people, right? I looked for the best in my dad. My relationship with him ended up being very, very giving and very, very good, despite my tough teenage years at that time and he had a tough time at that time too.
Right.
So the same thing occurred with my marriage. I said, when I dated somewhat, into my late teens and 20s and all the rest until I met my wife. And I just said to myself, I am not going to put my family in the same position that I'm in. I'm going to, and part of it was finding the right partner, though you never know once you get married how you're going to age and how your relationship is going to go. But
right,
a lot of it has to do with your attitude about things. Believe me, my wife and I are very different. And we've had our moments, not too many of them, but I think back to what my parents went through and how they kind of, didn't put the requisite effort in to make it work. And it's easy to give up. It's easy to point fingers. It's easy to blame. Not all marriages and relationships are meant to be, and probably theirs wasn't. But I haven't gone through marriage counseling. I haven't needed it. We've gone through parent coaching, and we'll talk about that later. But I've seen the forest through the trees, and I basically, said the grass is not greener. I'm not a prize myself, in every respect. So my wife has to tolerate me. It's not just me tolerating her. And we've been through a lot of adversity as parents as well. So, so the fact that this, in April, it will be 29 years that we've been married. And so,
congratulations.
We've lived in a bunch of different places and gone through a lot of different stuff. And there's no reason for us to be together until we get old. And, and it's one of those things. She had surgery on her meniscus 2 weeks ago, tore her knee up. And so she's hobbling around the house, can't do much. She's on crutches. She can't really put weight on that leg for like a month. And I'm doting on her, because that's what good husbands do,
Right.
If you had to go out of my way, and you have to learn how to be unselfish, and it has to come naturally in order for you to think of others and all the rest.
Right. So
I never thought of it. I never thought of it as I'm never going to go there and put my kids through this, because I wasn't going to put myself in that position.
So let's talk about the fact that, all right, so you did get married, but before you did, right, you had to start off as an entrepreneur at a young age, right? Whether it was getting money from doing errands or chores for the neighbors, or, wherever you did to earn money. What about college? Did you put yourself through college? Did you how was that progression to you starting your first business, the first real business, not just the errands and the one that got incorporated that, you grew to millions?
I mean, moving off the 12, 13-year-old time frame into the later teenage years, I worked as once I turned 16 and beyond, I worked, I was a waiter. I was a busboy. I worked in an insurance office, and did what I need to do to pay for gas, pay for entertainment. Obviously I didn't need food and shelter, but just about anything else, I had to pay for my own car. I had to pay for, and then when it came to, frankly, when it came to school, and going to college, I had the aptitude and the grades and the scores to go to a pretty high-powered school. But it wasn't in the cards financially, and there weren't scholarships available that I was able to tap into. So I ended up going to the University of Connecticut, because that was what was affordable for my parents at the time, and I paid for all my own, all my books and my own living expenses and everything like that. They paid for my tuition, and split it. And then, and it's like anything else, if you go to Yale, which is in Connecticut, 90% of the kids or even more are really high powered kids who really have good aptitude and achievement. At the University of Connecticut, it's a smaller group, but I was, in that smaller group of high powered kids. And so, it was actually good for my ego, because when I was in school, there'd be kids who would come to me for, in class for kind of tutoring help, or just wanting to study with me because they saw that I really got it. And so, it's where, it's making the best of wherever you are. I have I went back to school. I went and got my MBA subsequent, and started at night, but then went full time when I got a scholarship. So I finished that off in my mid-20s, before I started my own company, or my first company.
Were you working through college as well, like in school and working?
Oh, sure. You would like this. When I was in graduate school, I was a bartender at a biker bar. Can you see me doing that? It was like a local bar with a lot of people, a lot of people who were locals, who were rough and not educated, and but it was it was a job.
Right.
And
you did what you had to do, where you had to do it, as long as it was legal.
And there were some people who got out of hand that I had to, I had the upper hand because I could cut them off with the alcohol. And so that was the only thing that kept me in place. Or a couple times I feared for my life, let me tell you.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah. And so, you do what you
right.
you do what you need to do. I've always worked.
Right. And so what led to you starting the first business? Like, how did you get into it?
Yeah. So out of graduate school, I worked for, I got a job in the real estate group, because my MBA was in finance and real estate. And my undergraduate was management information systems, and I needed to see something, my computer background, what could I apply it to?
Right.
And real estate was tangible and it seemed interesting. And so I worked in the real estate group and looked at at GTE, which is now Verizon. And so they had investment real estate. They had their own real estate that they occupied. And I worked there for a couple of years. And it was a great company to start out with, but it was 100,000 people. And they went through, but it was a slow, stodgy company, an old school company. It was before cellular existed or mobile phones or anything like that. It was all landline stuff. They had divisions like Airphone. Remember when you called from a plane with the phone? That was a
yes.
GTE company. Okay. They had directories, which were phone directories that don't exist anymore either.
I know. Right? I remember those. Find somebody in the yellow pages.
Yeah. So, but long story short, I like getting things done, and I was fast moving and fast thinking, and wanted to be independent and control of my own destiny. And in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a little bit of a dip in the economy, and the reason was the tax laws changed in late 86, and I don't know if you remember, but there was a savings and loan crisis where all these banks that had provided loans to real estate developers kind of went under. And the reason was because the tax laws changed and didn't allow owners of real estate to depreciate some of their real estate and take advantage of the tax benefits as much. And so it created a it created a contraction in the economy. And so what the folks at GTE did was they brought McKinsey in to do a cost benefit analysis and basically figure out how to make the firm more streamlined. And one of the things they did was they said, you should outsource more of your corporate real estate because it's not in your core business. So I saw half my department leave. I was retained, but I basically saw the uncertainty about it and the fact that outside parties were in control. And I'm like, I felt like I was 12 again.
I was just going to
Right.
say, so how did that trigger, right? It kind of triggered that loss of control over the direction of your career, where when you were 12, it was loss of control of almost everything.
Right.
Right.
So literally what happened was, I said to myself, okay, they're wanting to outsource some of these non-core functions. Who are these outsourced providers? And these outsourced providers were very transactionally oriented people. Real estate is still, residential and commercial in a great sense is still very transactional. You have a local relationship with somebody, they help you with their office or their home, and you get a commission.
Right.
Our firm changed the model. We were, and what we did was instead of reporting down at the transactional level with a real estate director who was probably an ex-broker, we actually made it an asset to a company and made our value proposition and targeted the CFO. And so we showed how it could be an asset. And instead of it just being a transaction, we integrated the strategy with the transactions, with the design and construction, with the legal lease review and the lease administration to shorten the cycle time.
Okay.
And the value proposition was we have the flexibility and the objectivity and the expertise, and we can deliver it faster and better than you could if you did it yourself.
So that was while you were working for a company, but you started your own.
That was it.
So you broke
When I was
off.
working for the company, all we did was transactional work, and then we outsourced a bunch of our work. And I said, I got to join this outsourcing game too, because that will enable me to be more in control of my financial destiny.
So you became the outsourced provider.
Not for GTE, but
for
other companies.
Okay. And so, I'm connecting the dots in terms of how the trauma that happened when you were, a young boy at 12, right? And how it triggered that sense of loss of control where, the conversations about not having enough money between your parents, your perspective was, okay, well then I'll find a way to make my own money. Because I want to be able to do things and I don't want to hear this conversation. I don't want to hear that I don't have money. Like I want to be able to do it. So you took control and you've internalized that, and it's become an internal guide for a lot of your decisions, which includes the fact that, you're working, even though you're making money, the uncertainty of breaking up a company and downturns in the economy triggered that response again of, whoa, somebody else is taking the control here and I don't have say. And your perspective was to be like, I'm going to take control again. Now, and I know, if there's anybody here who's listening and you're a psychologist, therapist, because, there's this saying that, not saying, but that hyperindependence is a sign of trauma, right? Where when you've been let down so many times in the past, you overcompensate for that by not relying on anybody at all and finding a way to do it all on your own. Where we all need people, right? The normal human condition requires us to need people and use and rely on their help. And so, for me, I sometimes I mull on this. I think about, the fact that hyper independence, right, which is a trauma response, because to an extent, I feel as though I'm the same way too. Like I for so long I've been like, I've got this, I do this. And I feel as though it's because I was a middle child of 4 children and I was the second girl. So I wasn't even the firstborn and I wasn't the first boy. And I kind of got lost in the shuffle and had to kind of develop a coping mechanism of figuring things out on my own because, I just classic middle child syndrome. But, you know, when you're doing this, you're like, okay, I'm going to create a solution, because I can't rely on the solution being created for me. And then you start your own company, which in and of itself, right, even if it was your hyper independence and sense of having to have control might stem from a traumatic event, you're creating new jobs, right? You grew this company now from one, you started it, and you grew to 500 employees. How many jobs did you create? And then from the jobs that you created, like, I don't think you probably ever stopped to think, from all the jobs you created, the ripple effect of the people who you hired, who are now using the money that they've earned from working for your company to pay for other expenses, which is then flowing back into the economy. And this ripple effect that you've had that was triggered by this traumatic event when you were a young boy.
Yeah. So you said a lot there. Let me unpack a little bit of it.
Yes.
If I could. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with certainly wanting to pave my own way, and have control in my own way and be independent. But ironically, I'm the biggest team guy there is. And I realized that in a number of different ways. And that was, I was able to win this large account with Delta Airlines. They had a need to get call centers established within a 250-mile radius of Atlanta, and needed to do it quickly because in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, as the online was booming, and they needed more, and the economy was growing again, they needed more call center capacity. And so they needed to find and or build. And their existing real estate provider was just a transactor, you know, and they needed somebody who could understand the strategy, be able to identify the location, get the incentives, build the damn thing, project manage it, and get it open within a certain period of time on budget. And so we proved that we could do that because of our integrated team. And lo and behold, there still exist in Augusta and Birmingham and Huntsville. There still are call centers that, you know, Delta operates. And because of our ability, because we did a great job on it, you know, the one in Augusta was built and opened within 8 months. So from the ground up. And so, and that was everything, putting utilities in, getting the incentives, building the thing, everything. It was a record time. And so, but what I realized was I could be the Delta account manager and not create more opportunity for myself and for others, or I could figure out how to expand beyond that. And that was my goal anyhow, when I started the company. And so I had to find people that I could empower and trust and train and have a path for to develop and all the rest. And so lo and behold, you know, many accounts later, our firm ended up doing all of the real estate for United Technologies, for Manpower, for Computer Sciences Corporation, for T-Mobile, for Boeing, for Centex Homes in Dallas, for, you know, we did, and it was all exclusive multi-year contract deals. And so, you know, what ended up happening was I became one of the leaders who helped develop people, help be attuned to our clients, and was the guy that everybody wanted to work for, and the person who had the longest standing client relationships. I didn't lose clients. And so, and then when I worked at Deutsche Bank, which I worked at as a global director from 2010 to 2016, after my entrepreneurial ventures had ended, I wanted some global experience. I spent virtually all of 2012 in Frankfurt, Germany, trying to reconfigure a team that wasn't working well together. And after like 9 months there, my boss came up to me and he said, "It's amazing how you've turned this team around, and now everybody's asking to work for you." And they asked me to put together a program with an outside vendor on inspiring higher performance and working with outside partners that then ended up being delivered across the bank.
So based on what you just said, something I want to make sure that, we clarify when talking about having this hyper independence, and not relying on where your revenue comes from or the money comes from. I think it's probably very easy for it to be taken as, well, that also inherent in that statement must mean that you don't have an ability to work with others. And that is not the case, right? That is not what it is. That's saying that it's not inherent, that because you're hyper independent doesn't mean you can't work with others. And I think what the focus here is, and what is trying to convey, is there was a traumatic event which triggered a sense of hyper independence, which means you're capable of making decisions, making progress, whether you have someone to rely on or not. But having that other person or team, right? Or if someone is like, you're not going to put the success of what you're doing isn't going to rely on just like one person. You'll find a way to make it work. You need people, but do you know what I'm saying? Like, meaning where there isn't a codependence, where in order for this to work, in order for me to do something, if I'm hyper independent, me personally, or if anyone's listening, it's not like I'm going to do it all on my own. I'm just not going to leave the control of it to somebody else. I'm going to have an influence over how that outcome is going to be. I'm going to work with people, but I'm going to have a control over the outcome of how that person works with me. It's in my best interest to make sure they want to work with me. But I'm still going to have some control over, like, my whole endeavor, my whole enterprise is not going to collapse if someone chooses to leave. But I'm not going to build an enterprise where people want to leave because it doesn't work for my ultimate goal.
Right.
That,
I you and I know each other well enough in terms of how we get along with others and
Yeah.
how we try and work with business owners.
yes.
And literally the philosophy is you don't have control by dictating and thinking that you
Correct.
can do everything better yourself.
Exactly.
You have
Correct.
control by empowering others,
Yes.
but having clarity in what's expected, clarity in what's in it for them,
Yes.
clarity in their path,
Yes.
in terms of how to develop and what if they do well, what it could mean for them personally,
Yes.
professionally, financially.
Yes.
And then you just have to have metrics around it.
Right.
Right. So if you can measure, that things are on the rails or off the rails, you give them the rope, right? And then, allow them to succeed. They have to be allowed to make mistakes. And when the organizations that I ended up running ended up being, more than 50 people, and some of them got up to 500 or more, I wasn't the one interfacing with the customer every day. So if people were worried about making a mistake or about saying something wrong, they're the ones who are closest to the customer, who could say, you know what, this customer says they might need this service, or this customer wasn't happy with the way this system worked. You have to hear that from the front lines. And so you have to inspire and welcome that kind of communication and reward it, as opposed to poo-pooing it. And not a lot of leaders do that very well. They think they know everything and they push it down. And really, it's the other way around, right? It's the people on the front lines are the ones who have the most visibility. And you set the leader set the strategy and the vision.
Yes.
And here's what we're all about. Here's what we want to achieve in the next year, financially or in the community or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Here are some of the values that we have that we've kind of cultivated together. But when you do a business plan, you don't do it top down, you do it bottom up. It's like, what builds up to the top, what builds up, and then how do you execute against it? And the more team members feel like they have a part in it and they know what their contribution is and what it could mean to them, the better. And I've got great friendships and great memories and great experiences of people for the past 30 years, just from people that I've learned from, people that I've touched, people that I've helped make a lot of money, people that,
Mm-hmm.
have gotten the freedom that they've wanted because they've taken some of those principles to heart.
And something that you've just, and I'm going to use the word communicated, articulated so clearly, right? Is the ability to set a clear strategy or a desired outcome. And how do you do that to get what you want in a way where the team that you have working with you buys into it, understands it, and they have the guidelines in order to execute on that strategy so that you can have that desired outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm asking this question in light of, it's kind of like the segue into how, because of what you went through when you were 13, right? You have 12, you have charted a course for yourself that you're like, look, I went through this and I don't want to ever go through this. And so you've had to develop an internal form of being able to clearly articulate what you'd like to get, formulate a strategy for working with people so that everyone's working together with as very little friction as possible. And in a way where people are buying in and they're like, I like this. So I like working with Andy, right? And then you go through another traumatic experience with with one of your daughters. And I know you didn't really talk much about it, but I'd like to hear that story. And then how do you take that? It's a very important skill. It's a very, that is, whether you are a business owner, a manager, a leader, or a parent, right? That the overarching strategy, which is helping someone, achieve a certain desired outcome, even though the steps might be different in a business setting, it's very similar as a parent because you have a child and you want a desired outcome of them being healthy, of being able to make decisions on their own, to being able to function independently as an adult when they grow up. And what is that journey like when they're growing up in formulating, this? How do you communicate with them? How do you work with them? How do you get that child to buy into a certain idea? Because we could tell them, but then, everybody's independent and have their own will, and children will grow up and then make up their own minds anyway. Or, you can have an employee and you could just be like, do this, do this, do this, do this, without getting any buy-in. And you're going to have high attrition and you're going to have, all sorts of other problems because you haven't gotten someone to buy into what the desired outcome is.
Right.
Like,
can I'd love to dive into my kids,
yes,
and the parenting aspect, but
yes,
can I quickly share kind of a holy shit
yes,
kind of moment that talk to me that made me understand how to think about being attuned to others, whether it's your employees or your kids or your friends or otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was younger, I went to there's a place in there are a couple of locations for it, but it's called the Center for Creative Leadership. It's in
Mm-hmm.
Greensboro, North Carolina, and there's some other things. And it's basically a think tank and a place that has classes and courses for inspiring leaders. And so
Mm-hmm.
I went and took a week-long course there. And when I was younger, to help learn, because you always got to learn, you always got to
Always.
sharpen your spear.
Yes.
And they did one exercise that really changed my life. And
Mm-hmm.
what happened was they broke us into a team of 12. We had like 36 people or something like that. So they broke us into teams of 12. And they said, we want you to put this puzzle together as a team, and it's going to be timed. And I was like, it was like a 10-minute timer or something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's not such a big deal. What the heck? I'll partake in this with the team. And, I'm competitive. I wanted to get the right outcome. But they said there's a little bit of a curveball here. You're going to be blindfolded. So you lose one of your senses, right? And you can't see and you can't communicate. And so So they blindfold us and the clock starts. And we have the puzzle pieces in front of us, and we realize that the puzzle pieces are decent sized. And we kind of count them, and we understand that there are 12 of them. And nobody knows what to say, and nobody a leader doesn't kind of stand out. Everybody's kind of nervous. Everybody's thinking of a strategy, and I'm getting a little uptight because time is going by.
Right.
And so eventually I just chimed in and I said, there are 12 pieces and 12 people. Why doesn't each person grab a piece? Okay, so we all grab the piece. Okay, why don't we see who's got the corners? Raise your hand, shout out. Obviously, raising your hand doesn't do much. Shout out if you have a corner.
Right.
So we put the corners into place. We're able to figure out the rest of it by communicating well, and I was directing because of the time constraint. And we won. Of the three groups, we got it done in time, and we got it done. So then we finished and kind of unpacked what worked and what didn't work. And it was pretty revealing to me what happened. Of the 12 people in my group, of which I was a part, 3 or 4 of them said, hey, we kind of weren't getting anywhere, and Andy really stepped up and led us to victory. Mm-hmm. Yay, right? And that was kind of my mindset. That's what I thought. Mm-hmm. The other 7 basically said, I know we didn't have a direction at first, but once Andy stepped in and we got some momentum, I didn't feel like I had a say. Yeah, I felt like I was shut out and that I was just being dragged along rather than having participation in this journey. And so I said to myself, that was myopic on my part. You can't, not everybody gets to decide, but everybody should play their part and certainly have a say. And so I've always lived that after that lesson, including with my kids. Interesting story, huh?
That is, yes, very, very, very interesting. And I think, when I was doing the MBA program, we did a similar exercise with putting together a puzzle robot. And there was an example of a fully put together robot in the front of the room, and we're all split into teams. And we all had to put together our own robots, but this is what the rules were. Only one person can go and look at how the actual robot was constructed, and then come back and tell the rest of the team what to do in order to put the robot together. Again, it was timed, right? And it is, you're 100%.
Yeah, I see
right,
that, yeah.
Right? Can you articulate, can you give directions for desired outcome? Can you get a buy-in from highly intelligent people who all have an idea of as to how things are supposed to go? Someone will come back and say, well, this piece needs to go there. And you have somebody saying, but that doesn't make sense. Look at the different color, And so how do you get everyone to have their say? And to one point, how much of a say do you allow people to have? Otherwise, you'll always just be pulled in different directions, never moving the needle forward. But we're going to take a very short break here, because we're going to take this in terms of, that story that you just relayed with the puzzle pieces where everyone's blindfolded, and how some was like, thank you for the direction. And then some were like, okay, it was great up to a point. But then afterwards, I felt like I probably would have just walked out because you're not the boss of me, right? Was pretty much their attitude. That's pretty much their attitude. And so we find that you have an overlap with parenting as well, where, you want to give direction to have, because when you have a baby, there is no, what do you want to do when you're 18 months? It's no, you don't do this. You don't have a choice. But then at what point do you start doing okay, let's get buy-in? And okay, how do you lay the boundaries? Because we can't just go on and on forever, just getting, opinions. There has to be boundaries in the strategy. Otherwise, you're not going to move forward. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more. We want to hear Andy's story about what happened with his daughters. and how he's used that, to really, help so many others in meaningful ways so that there's a better outcome in the relationships that they have. So we'll be right back right after this. I am back with Andy Goldstrom. If you're now tuning in on allrealradio.com, been speaking with Andy Goldstrom, businessman, entrepreneur, executive coach advisor, also a parent coach advisor. And right before the break, he relayed this story of leadership, this exercise that was done where, you've got a group of 12 blindfolded and having to put a puzzle piece together. And the insightful observation that he made about how, he had to get, he stepped up to figure out to get everyone to working together as a team in order to complete this puzzle. And, some of them were very appreciative, saying, okay, he took charge. It was great. We did it. And then you had others who said, you know what, it was great up to a point, but then once, things started moving, like I felt like I had no say, like I wasn't part of this. This was all Andy's show. And there was resentment. And so, it's very telling of communication styles and, what we assume is happening because, oh, the puzzle was being built. It was all great. Right now, and that really wasn't the case, as he learned. And so, Andy, is there a correlation between what was like an aha moment for you with that exercise, and have you utilized that in how you help parents coach today, with your, with what you've learned and what you went through with your own children?
Yeah. The answer is yes, an affirmative. And I've got two kids who one's 26 now and one is going to be 22 tomorrow.
Oh, happy birthday.
And yeah, and the 22-year-old's kind of the focus of this discussion here.
Mhm.
She, and just so you know, this is another story. My 22-year-old, our firstborn, we had a pretty easy time in terms of being able to get pregnant when we wanted to get pregnant and having our first daughter. Second one didn't happen quite as quickly. And so my wife ended up going on Clomid, which is a drug to help. And when she was there in her first month, I was away on business for a couple weeks. And she basically said, you need to come home. It's that time we've been trying, and now I'm on this drug and hopefully we can make it happen. And I thought about it and called her back and I said, you know what? I don't think I need to be home. I just need to be with you. And I'm really busy. Why don't you come to be with me? So she came from Atlanta up to Charlotte where I was, and, and it happened. And so her name is Audrey, but a lot of people said she should have been named Caroline or Charlotte or something like that, right? So, but she's a really cute kid and a vivacious kid. She never met a stranger. When she was like 5 or 6 years old, we were in a restaurant and there was I remember, it was like an Applebee's or something like that. We were in a booth and there was a bar in the middle and there was like a businessman who was alone. And she just decided to go up to this guy who was probably in his 40s or 50s and just befriend him. And before you knew it, she was like putting whipped cream from his dessert on his nose. And this is a 6-year-old girl. I mean, she had a, from 0 to 12 or 0 to 13, she just had the time of her life.
Right.
She was, but then what happened was she started struggling a little bit. And we had her tested and she had short-term memory challenges. The way her wiring was, it wasn't firing and she couldn't retain everything. So her learning curve was greater. So she wasn't maturing as fast or socially or academically, and kids started to surpass her and she couldn't figure out why. And she started to get anxious and depressed. So what did we do? We we tried to do whatever we could locally. So for a couple of years, we got her tutors, we got her, an IEP program, at school. We got her to a psychiatrist to get her properly medicated. She went to a therapist. She was in other programs to help provide a village around her and have support, and it wasn't enough. So she started spiraling, hanging out, doing defiant things, getting into drugs, putting herself and others in danger. And what did we do as parents when that occurred? We got worried for her and started locking her down and fighting with her. And she got more and more defiant. And I didn't realize at the time that she wasn't trying to be a bad kid. She was just trying to cope in her own way.
Right.
And again, feeling a sense of control, feeling like she's supported and understood. And we didn't understand her, and we didn't allow her to have that sense of control. So long story short, we came across this ecosystem or this community called wilderness therapy, where you actually take your kid out of their environment, you send them somewhere else for like 6 to 9 weeks, and it's kind of a reset button. They get removed from all their stressors,
right?
And they get an opportunity to reset to start moving forward. So she went to a place in Hawaii, because it was in January, and most of the other ones are outdoors, kind of like outward bound,
right?
Colorado and Utah, and she wasn't a real cold weather person, and we wanted her to focus more on her emotions. So she was gone for 9 weeks, and at the start. And it proved to be very, very positive for her. It was very hard on us. We were, my wife was the rescuer. I was the get her done kind of guy. She was the one always around. I wasn't always around. We grieved over the fact that our daughter wasn't exactly what we hoped she would be, or she hoped she would be at the moment. And there was some finger pointing about our parenting styles. And so she ended up, after that 9 weeks, she ended up at a residential treatment location. And that is basically a place where you can finish your schooling, get a job, live and be with other peers, and get reintegrated, so that when you come back home or go somewhere else to live on your own, you actually have had the stress back on you, and you have lots of additional therapy.
Right.
And so she did that for 9 months, and so was away for a year before she came home. And she learned a lot of, she grew up a lot and learned a lot of new skills, and it wasn't all easy. She had her ups and downs. It's meant to be that way. But we got parent coaching, and it helped us a whole lot. And
what did you learn? How did you have to learn as a parent to deal with this, right? Because she changed, but you also had to learn how to change along with her, so that she didn't relapse and go back into old patterns.
Right. Well, you hit it on that. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, part of it was she could be in better shape, but if she comes home and we treat her the same way,
right,
that's not a good recipe. And so my wife and I had to learn how to forgive each other, and we needed to learn how to align better. There were times where we would disagree in front of our kids, right? And that gives mixed messages. We wouldn't follow through on, consequences or things for her actions. We wouldn't be clear in our communication. We learned how to kind of work through that. And it kind of came to a head just before she was supposed to come home at the end of 2018, around Christmas time. We were hoping she was ready to come home, and we were told that she was ready to come home. But what they do is you create a contract at the end of that time, so that when you come home, there's kind of an agreement between the parents and the child in terms of acceptable behaviors and consequences for certain things in a broad sense. And she decided that she wanted to come home and party. She figured that drinking and smoking were okay when she came home because she didn't need it to cope anymore because she had discovered some skills, and she had been sober for a year. And so she missed her last semester of high school because she was pulled to go to these locations. And so she was entitled to do that. And we worked with our parent coach because, we wanted our kid home for Christmas, or our Hanukkah in our case. And we wanted we wanted her home, and we realized that if she didn't come home, she'd be alone, because a lot of staff go on vacation. A lot of kids come home are allowed to come home for the holiday,
right,
from the program. But we were coached into staying steadfast with her.
right.
And ultimately she ended up staying like another 6 weeks. And and she came back to us, and we basically delivered a message saying, I'm sorry you can't come home because you're not willing to adhere to our rules, and we're your parents, and this is in your best interest.
Right.
And we didn't say you can't ever drink or smoke. We said, give it 90 days. This is a second chance to get a head start, and we want to give you everything you can to do well. And so when she finally came home, she said, I thought I was going to get my way if I wore you guys out, but you guys were aligned like you've never been aligned before. And you guys really do look out for my best interest. And I gained a real appreciation for that, no matter how hard it was. And so there was, a year before, my wife and I would have been at odds. She would have wanted to let her come home. I would have said no. And I would, and the way it would have been communicated would have been very divisive.
Right.
And so that was a real breakthrough. And there were breakthroughs for Audrey too. She, between her wilderness and residential treatment experience, my wife flew out and met her, coming from Hawaii to Oregon to get her transitioned in Oregon. And they had dinner one night, and it was just before my daughter's 18th birthday. And she said my daughter said to her, I feel very fortunate. And my wife is thinking, she's been away for 3 months. She had a traumatic experience. She's partially through some therapies, advanced therapies.
But
why is she staying this?
Yeah.
And my daughter said that she was able to receive some training and coping skills that nobody will ever else get, that she understands and can implement. And and there are adults who are 100% functioning, and kids like her, people like her with anxiety and depression, who will never have that toolkit. And she said, I feel very fortunate at my age that I was able to develop that. And so that was kind of a wise thing for her to say, and an interesting thing for her to say. And she carries it with her. I remember my wife and I having a disagreement not long after she came home, and she advised us on how to handle it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. She became the teacher. And so both of you did parent coaching so that you both as a couple could work with your daughter. And then in turn, you became coaches yourself. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah. So so what happened was, it was, one other thing that was interesting is that when my daughter came home, she applied for a summer camp job. She went to a summer camp for many summers, and she had a Zoom interview. This was in the spring of 2019. And she was very transparent and genuine and forthright about her journey. And the people who run the camp were really special and smart and understanding. And they basically said, we like people who have overcome obstacles and have recognized what their deficiencies are, and you could teach us a lot.
Right.
We want to hire you. So that was a really profound story. And she was on Zoom in another room. I happened to overhear it. I'm not nosy, but I was
Right.
that time. And so that whole time that we were going through parent coaching, and that we were having to make some very big decisions. To send my daughter away, it cost us over $10,000 a month. Yep. Between the therapies and the housing and the boarding and everything. And not a lot of it's covered by insurance. Most of it was not. Second thing is, we had to make decisions about parent coaching. We had to make decisions about transportation to and from that she could get there safely.
Right.
We had to make decisions about, we used an educational consultant because we didn't know which program she should go to. There were just a lot of things, and we felt very alone, that everything was a research project. It was heated, it was expensive, it was timely, and there was nowhere to turn except Googling things. And so what I did with my daughter's permission was I created a podcast called the Wilderness Therapy and Residential Treatment Journey podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And it was meant to be for parents, by parents, so
Right.
that there was a voice. And so if somebody is having trouble with their kid and is trying to figure out the path, if their kids are away at wilderness or residential treatment or therapeutic boarding schools or something in that related ecosystem, and they need some inspiration or education, I had a panel of experts and people who made them feel like they're not alone. And so I've been doing it since the spring of 2020, and it gets thousands of downloads every episode I post, and it's very well regarded, and I get a lot of good feedback, and I've gotten to learn a lot and talk to a lot of different people and about a lot of different topics. The most popular episode was in the first season. My wife interviewed my daughter, and it was a really genuine, touching
Right.
episode. People want to hear from those kinds of things. And because the feedback of that was so positive, I kind of saw that as, you know what, I've inspired a lot of people through my work. I have a situation where I was a lonely parent who needed more inspiration. Maybe I should figure out how to get trained to help parents too.
Right.
And so I got certified in 2 different organizations that do this, and really learned how to be even more of a facilitator to help parents educate themselves a little bit more, or get education relating to understanding themselves, understanding their strengths, understanding what approaches and options there are, and creating a plan so they can
Yes.
actually, act on it. And not unlike a business, when I parent coach, I meet with parents each week, typically via Zoom, and they test different approaches with their kids. They enjoy, they experience life. And like a business, they make adjustments along the way and have a coach to help help them make the adjustments until they get where they need to get to. And so I've worked with it's been terrific, because I've gotten to be able to work with parents whose kids are in the middle of wilderness therapy or getting ready to go, or on their
Mm-hmm.
transition home, and they needed some extra coaching in order to, just like I needed the coaching in order to make the transition work. And it's not all of it has been in that ecosystem. I've worked with co-parent issues with parents who are in the middle of a divorce proceeding, not knowing how to handle their ex, and how to handle their kids, to make sure that their kids aren't impacted the way I was impacted.
Right. Right.
I've worked with a 60-year-old mom who has 3 boys who were in their 20s, and the 3 boys and the mother rebounded because all of her value was in her relationship with her husband, and she lost her husband, so she didn't have a lot of value in herself, and rebounded to a guy who was, in her son's opinion, not the best fit in her mother's best interest, but she needed it from an attachment standpoint. And the sons were acting like her parents,
Right.
and the sons are not her parents. So we had to figure out how to get them to communicate together. And I worked with
Right.
all of them. And at first they weren't talking, and they all got together for Christmas, and so, stuff like that is, making a buck is great. Getting people to have lifelong relationships and understanding how to communicate is really impactful.
Can you say the name of the podcast again?
Yeah, it's available on just about anywhere you can get a podcast, but it's called the Wilderness Therapy and Residential Treatment Journey Podcast.
And so we'll have that added to the bar if you're watching this on YouTube, so you can actually see it. If you're listening to it, check it out, because, through Andy's journey, through the divorce, through opening businesses, through what he went through with his younger daughter, what he and his wife had to learn together in order to have a favorable outcome in terms of the direction of Audrey's life. In that journey, in that story, a lot of that is interwoven with personal development, right? Attending the leadership workshop, being, seeking out information, seeking out that ecosystem, that community that could help move you forward. And so, one of the things that, from this show, GoalPost, right? And that's the purpose. The name of the show is GoalPost, right? How do you make it to where you're trying to go? Right? How do you improve the relationship with your children? How do you grow your business? How do you have a more fulfilling life? How do you measure where you want to go and how do you get there? And, for many of you who are listening, you are most likely a high performing individual, and any area that doesn't seem to meet up to where you wanted it to be, you have to find that community. You have to find that place where you can get inspired, you can get tools in order to do better or to get closer to where you'd like to be. And so, visit, the website, janellesam.com, check out All Real Radio. There's going to be, a workshop, Andy and I, we've been talking about this and offering something where you can learn, where you can be equipped with tools, with knowledge to learn how to incorporate communication strategies. You will learn how to, have a different perspective on what might seem to be something horrible in your life, and how could you reframe that perspective to say, where's the opportunity in this, right? And we could look at Andy's story. What was horrible, which is parents not being able to pay for anything. For him, the opportunity was, I'm going to get a job. I'm going to learn how to do this on my own, and then do it again and again and again, right? And the opportunity where, having a child, the pain of a parent looking at your child suffering, right, is painful. And the opportunity in that was he was able to take it, learn from it, grow from it, and now is helping others who are going through a similar situation in meaningful ways, where he's a coach and he's advisor. Go to my website. You'll see, you can learn more about Andy, more about the work that he's doing. And Andy, also, you wrote a book, right? You wrote a book, published a book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, first, for anybody who's interested in the parent coaching, you can find out more too at www.parentsjourneycoaching.net. If you know somebody who needs help, there's no obligation or anything like that. I think you can tell, I just care about helping. I'm at a point now, having sold a couple businesses and all the rest, that I have the financial freedom where I don't have to work. I could retire. I still have the desire to help people, and so I continue to work. And so, that's a big part. That's a big part of what I do is help people. There are a lot of places that I could have gone off the rails in my personal life, and I certainly had my down moments and troubled moments, but life is a roller coaster, and you have to figure out how to maneuver and how to have good perspective. I could buy a lot of stuff but based upon my upbringing and based upon my mindset, I'm not that materialistic. I don't need the extra car, the extra house, the extra thing. That doesn't fulfill me. It's the relationships and the experiences and helping people and getting, the feedback is really at my stage in life what life is about. The book I wrote, I realized when I was helping a lot of people grow their businesses really rapidly, was that it wasn't packaged. It was really pulling from, I'd go deep with these organizations and pull from either my head or my hard drive different tools and different things that I put together, and it wasn't packaged. And I said, how could I create more credibility and reach more people, for people who are less sophisticated in the business world and maybe don't have as many experiences as I've had, mistakes and successes and all the rest. And so what I did was I wrote a book, and it's called Grow Like a Pro, Lessons from a Two-Time Inc. 500 Executive. It's available on Amazon. And really it tells you, it gives you, the sections are about identifying a problem, targeting the right customer, launching profitably, managing the sales process, leading the right team, managing finances, operating efficiently, tracking performance, and developing an exit plan. So it's got all of the different elements to it. And it also has, stories of, it has tools and approaches, which are actually available with links that you can either, if you get the hard copy of the book, you can type it in and download certain tools and things that you can use and put into play right away. Or if you have it on a Kindle or something like that, or an ebook, you can download it right there. And so it's meant to be a very practical book with practical stories and practical approaches to each of those areas. And one of the things I learned was, 20 years ago, if you wanted to start a technology company, it would cost you six figures. Just the cost of the technology, the cost of the team, the cost of developing the software, housing the software, or whatever. If you wanted to do it today, all you need to do is get a URL and open a website. It's less than a tenth to actually have a viable business, but that doesn't mean you know how to run or grow the business. So the cost of entry is so much lower given technology nowadays, but people don't know how to make those adjustments. And Mid-Course Advisors, the company that I own, is really a company that the mid-course is actually a rocket analogy. There's a launch, and then a mid-course, and then a re-entry. And the mid-course is about 80% of the life of a business, where you need to make most of the adjustments during your business's lifespan. And so, and what happens is, if you make those adjustments, then the growth path elongates, right, as opposed to going down. And you continually have to do that, because there are things within your control or beyond your control based upon governmental things, demographic things.
There is so much to learn,
right,
to learn about running a business. And, if you're really interested, let's, check out, go to the website, you'll find out, the title of the book will be right on the bar here. You can see it if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening, you're on the radio, you're driving, pop over to the website, go to JanelleSam.com, take a look at it. We're going to have the link to where you can get it right on Amazon, so that you don't have to search it out. There's so much information packed in there. If you're interested in the parent coaching as well, there's so much. And we'd also like to hear from you. If there is, you found value in hearing Andy's story, and there's more of this you'd like to hear, let me know. Let me know, because we can have him come back. We might dive into a little bit deeper some of the other areas of coaching. Both of he and I work together. We're colleagues, and we advise the owners of law firms. And a lot of what we do isn't just the technical stuff, right? There's an overlap into how we approach what you're going to try to do personally and professionally and financially. And so there's a lot of overlap there. So there's a lot of value that could be extracted from this. And we're hoping here, my goal to you as a listener is that, anyone that's on this show, that when you're listening, that you're hearing their experience of what they've done and what they've accomplished in spite of, right? Not, or because of something that in society would generally be used, would be the reason why many aren't able to succeed. And we're showing you, no, there is a better way. It could happen. It could be the reason you succeed. Right. And so, we just love the fact that, I'm appreciative, Andy, that you took the time to sit here with me, to tell your story, about what you went through as a child, about your experience in business, about what you went through as a parent. and how you're still adding value, not just in the business community, but for people who are struggling in how they're dealing with their troubled relationships, and how, giving them the tools and the community to feel as though, look, there is help. I don't have to go this alone. So I thank you. I thank you for sharing that with me tonight.
Thank you for having me, and great to spend some time with you. And I don't duck from my story. I'm not embarrassed by it. Part of the reason people came when Audrey was in crisis and our family was in crisis was because we didn't say, she left school. All of a sudden she left the state. People were saying, where's Audrey? We didn't say she was at the mall or she just was visiting a friend. We basically, for the people who really knew us, they knew she was struggling a little bit. And we were honest about it, and there's a stigma with it, but we were unabashed. And we basically just said, we're giving her the gift. We're trying to get help and trying to heal our family, and, and being genuine's appreciated. Everybody's got their stuff. Everybody's got, health issues or mental problems, job loss.
Yes. And we own it.
Everybody's got stuff in their own families. Everybody's got stuff, and we had to deal with our stuff.
That's right. And we own it. Well, I'll be right back after the break to kind of wrap this all up. So thank you, Andy. And I'll be right back after the break. I just want to say thank you to Andy Goldstrom for joining me tonight, and for all of you who are listening and heard his story, his journey from being a child of divorce and how that spurred on his ability to become an entrepreneur and becoming very successful in business. And then the struggles, the trials he went through with his younger daughter, and using that opportunity to learn from, grow himself, and then become a parent coach to help other parents who are going through the same, who might be going through that same challenge in their own personal lives, in your own personal life. And you can reach him. There's new shows on GoalPost every Sunday night. Listen on www.allrealradio.com. You can find me. I'm on social media at Miss MS _ Janelle _ Sam on both TikTok and Instagram. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Especially if you've got professional affiliations and you'd like to reach out to me there, just find me at Janelle Sam. Send me an email, janellesam2020@gmail.com. I would love to hear if you found value in these shows. I'd love to hear what you'd like to hear about. Who would you like to see, or what is the topic that you'd like to have on the show that you would add a lot of value to you? There are workshops, seminars that will be offered soon. Keep checking the website. We'll post about them so that you can access them, so that you can grow and make it to the next level. I love helping people reach their full potential. And I bring my experience to this so that you as a listener, if you're trying to increase your revenues, if you own a business, or if you're trying to find a way to increase your value in the marketplace so that you can earn more of an income, or if you'd like to have a better relationship or just a change perspective, how do you find that circle where these engaging conversations happen, that they're by design, meant to challenge you, meant to trigger you, meant to get you thinking about certain scenarios within your own life differently? I hope you enjoyed the show, and I look forward to having you join me again on the next episode of GoalPost.